Thank you for joining this virtual legislative coffee presented by the League of Women Voters, the Bonner Springs NAACP, and the Bonner Springs City Library. I'm Jack Brand.
Jack, you just went on mute. Thanks.
Okay. This morning we'll hear from three of our Kansas.
Jack, you just went on mute again.
It is showing that the host has muted me. So if that's something the host can take care of, that would be great. We are offering closed captions. If you do not see the captions, please click the CC button at the bottom of the Zoom window and choose Show Captions. A link to the full forum guidelines will be placed in chat, but I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items before we begin. This is an educational, nonpartisan event for the general public. Those attending in person at the library may submit questions on the index cards at the table in the corner. Legislators will each have 3-minute opening statements and will have 3 minutes each to answer the questions during the question and answer period. We will provide a countdown of time remaining at 1 minute, 30 seconds, and at time. The partner organizations co-sponsoring this forum believe that democracy works best when citizens are informed and active. We hope this virtual coffee provides you the opportunity to learn more about your legislators and what is happening in the State House. And now I'd like to welcome our moderator, Teresa Bolton, Secretary of the Bonner Springs NAACP.
Thank you, Jack. I'm excited to listen to our legislators talk about this year's legislative session. We'll begin each of our legislators speaking for 3 minutes about what they have been doing in Topeka. Besides me, keeping time is Susan Martin with the League of Women Voters. Thank you, Susan, and thank you all for participating in the room. Joining us today are Representative Tom Burroughs, District 33, Senator Pat Pettey, District 6, and Senator Jeff Pittman, District 5. Representative Burroughs, thank you for joining us today and welcome. Your time begins now. You'll be first.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to speak this morning. I think it's important that our constituents have an idea as to the process that we're going through during the legislative session and those issues that are not only important to our community, but are important to us as individuals. This is our time to espouse those. As many of you may know, I was the ranking member for redistricting in the Kansas House, which was a very challenging process. Either I was blessed or cursed to have that position because it was like putting together a 1,000-piece puzzle where the corners don't match up. And it was one of the largest challenges I've been through in probably the last 6-8 years, but we got through it nonetheless. As I'll start with the committee assignments that I have as a legislator. I sit on appropriations. I also sit on the general government budget, which is a subcommittee of appropriations. I also sit on legislative post audit as the ranking member. And then I also have an appointment from the governor to oversee combat sports in the state of Kansas as the Kansas Athletic Commissioner. One of my assignments this year, as I stated, was the Redistricting Committee, and that was an on-call committee. And we dealt with the congressional map. And as you are aware, I sponsored the League of Women Voters map to get things started. And we were successful in defending the map initially up front, making some changes. But as you all know, that map fell by the wayside, and we went with a map that is now being challenged in the courts on the congressional side because of the split between Wyandotte County and north and south of I-70, the separation from Wyandotte County. That one is working through the system. The House maps, we passed those last week. The House maps were a challenge, and to say the very least, I believe that we will see a fairly even opportunity to maintain the makeup of the House by party. I think the map was about as congenial as it could possibly be without bloodletting and battles on the House floor. And with that, I'll stand for questions and let others speak to issues they may have, and we'll all wait until questions come forward. But thank you for the opportunity to open this morning.
Thank you. And are we going to go ahead and, okay, and thank you, Senator Pettey, for joining us today, and welcome also. Your time begins now.
Thank you. I'm Senator Pat Pettey. I represent the 6th district. It encompasses a lot of the south side of Wyandotte County, all the way from 7th Street, all the way out to the former Schlitterbahn location, and then a small portion of Johnson County in Merriam. And I serve on public health and welfare, ways and means. I'm the ranking minority in public health and welfare. I'm on ways and means, and I'm on education. And I'm also on a CAN-CARE oversight committee and a joint committee on pensions and investments and benefits and the confirmation oversight. So I really want to thank you for the opportunity to work with and for the citizens of Kansas and the families of the 6th district. So this session has been really a very difficult and stressful session. Representative Burroughs talked about redistricting. I don't serve on redistricting, but we are all impacted by it. And as he mentioned, he's ranking on the House side. We had a similar committee on the Senate side with a lot of contention and a lot of dissatisfaction on the part of senators, particularly Democratic senators, on the final map that was passed out of the Senate. Unfortunately, it hasn't stopped as with redistricting, because they'll now be doing maps for the State Board of Education, or will be doing maps for the State Board of Education. And again, there's doesn't seem to be interest in fair representation or quality representation, but just gerrymandering by party. So we have more to look forward to with that. My biggest concern, we did pass a budget on the Senate side that now is going to conference. Due to the fact that we had a strong ending balance, there was a lot of interest in taking care of areas that we hadn't been able to do with for special needs, and we addressed those. We did fully fund public education, at least to this point. We have K-12 education, and we made significant investments in intellectual and developmentally disabled. When we also are giving raises to our state, very much needed raises to our state employees, and we're paying off many of our debts. However, we're not addressing one of the biggest things that our citizens are interested in, and that's the food sales tax. So my colleagues have ignored that need, and we had the revenues to do that. Unfortunately, I think now we're putting ourselves in a place where we might not be able to afford that. The other thing that we have not done, or that we have continually done, is attack our public schools. And that's been of great concern. And I will talk about that later. That's particularly one issue called the Parent Bill of Rights. So again, thanks for being here. I look forward to questions.
Thank you. And thank you, Senator Pittman, for joining us today as well. And welcome, and your time begins now.
Great. Thank you guys for putting this on. I always enjoy interacting with the public, especially with the League of Women Voters. As Representative Burroughs said, we advocated for the map that the League put together, and we were really pleased with the work that was put in across the state with the League doing that, as well as the input that we had during the redistricting process from the NAACP members. That's huge. Unfortunately, in the map discussions, I'll just talk about me being personally impacted. My district is Senate District 5. That includes Leavenworth, Fort Leavenworth, Lansing, currently Piper, Bonner, and part of Edwardsville. And with this new map, if it goes through on the Senate side, the map removes my district. It takes Bonner and Edwardsville out of my district, and instead puts Baser in. So that's an unfortunate thing, because I really do enjoy representing the Bonner Springs people. I've really enjoyed it. Unfortunately, it looks like I might not be able to do that anymore, but we'll see how that map turns out. So that's a big thing for me. That's a big thing for my district. It's a big thing for Bonner in terms of understanding where they're being slotted in. I feel like they're not necessarily being as prioritized as they should have been, because now we'll have 4 senators representing Wyandotte County, which I think is a bit much. A big thing on the budget. Senator Pettey mentioned that. I'm excited that we had been able to have a fiscally responsible budget put together, because we corrected what had to happen during the Brownback era over the last 5 years. Lots of bad policies now. We've got a $3 billion surplus, which would have allowed us to take out sales tax on food. But due to politics, largely, we're not moving forward on that, and we're going to continue to push. But we did get capers for the retired state employers. That fund is doing really, really well. We had the increase for our state workers that last year had been denied. Fully funding education is a huge priority for me, so that we continue to have access for our kids to be educated no matter what their zip code is, in the same way. But there are bills on the floor that are concerning. We've got bills that are attacking elections, access to voting. We've got bills that are putting at jeopardy some of our schools. We've got folks that are attacking the policies that were put in place during the pandemic, and there's a huge backlash around that. And so we find ourselves with a lot of bad ideas, in my opinion, that aren't necessarily working to come up with a better future for Kansas, more of a reactionary. I do serve on a number of committees: transportation, financial institutions, and a lot of technology committees, because that is my background. I bring that to the state. I look forward to the questions coming up. I know my time is up, so thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, and thank you all. So we will now move on to our questions. Our first question is, I understand that the Bonner Springs School District objects to the Parents' Bill of Rights and Academic Transparency bills currently under consideration in the legislature, pointing out that they've received few such complaints, and the legislation would have a significant adverse impact on teaching. Where do you stand on this legislation? And the topic is School Bill of Rights.
I'll go ahead and talk about that. So this bill is Senate Bill 496, although I'm sure Representative Burroughs will talk about on the House side. It's a very bad bill, and it's very much a concern for me as a retired educator. I see it being setting up, it's a bully bill of demands, and it sets up an adversarial relationship between parents and the educator. I said in committee that it's a short bill in comparison to many other bills that come before the legislature, but within this short bill, there are 4 places that are directly speak to demands for within the classroom. And so as an example, I just said, as a teacher, I looked at it and I thought I need to have an extra chair by each student's desk so that the parent can be there to say, no, I don't want my child to be involved in this math lesson. No, I don't want my child to read this book. In fact, I was just given a real life example just yesterday of a 4th grade teacher who has a class book that they're reading, and a parent has objected to that class book. And I taught 4th grade for 8 years, so I can understand that. And so she is having to develop a curriculum for one child for one different book, instead of being involved in the group development within the classroom and the lessons that are involved. So it's very broad, it's very far reaching. It's not just with the academics, it's also with any kind of medical decisions as well. So it's really not progressive for schools or for a relationship with families. So that again is called the Parent Bill of Rights, but it's a bully bill of demands.
If I can, I'll go next. Are you okay with that, Tom? Okay. Yeah, I'd echo Senator Pettey. I I voted against this. It was in the Senate. You know, they call it the Bill of Rights, but it's a misnamed thing. Many things that have names like that often aren't exactly what they say. It puts an oversized burden on our teachers. They've come out of a pandemic, and I fully support the Bonner Springs School District idea that why would we put an arbitrary more load on our teachers as they're coming out of the pandemic in a workforce. We have a workforce shortage right now. And this is not really something to help them. It's something where it's basically a veiled attack on the teachers, implying that they're doing something very wrong. And I just don't support that. And the other thing that I don't really like inside of this, there's three things that are really, one is the oversized burden it puts on the teachers, the school districts during a time when they don't need that. The second thing was that in the version that we saw, it was taking vaccines and saying, hey, look, our kids can just opt out of all vaccines if we decide to. That includes polio, MMR, and all these other ones. And the third thing that I really didn't like was the veiled attack on critical thinking around race. Quite frankly, there's a mention of the Civil Rights Bill from 1964, Civil Rights Act, and it's a very kind of veiled attack on the idea that people of different colors are attacking white people's history, when in fact that's just not happening out there. And it seems very, very kind of very bad.
Representative Burroughs, did you want to speak on that question?
There's very little I can add. I will state it never ceases to amaze me, the attack on public education that the Republicans continue to put forward, the anti-educators. It's frustrating when they use our children as pawns for the very basis of education. It's an attack on teachers, it's an attack on the public education system, it's an attack on community leadership for those that have our children's best interest at heart through the educational process. It's just disheartening to continue to see it move forward. And that's not the only bill that they utilize this year. There are a number of others.
All right. Our next question. What changes, this is under budget, the topic. What changes do you expect to see, and what changes would you like to see in the state's initial budget as it makes its way into a final budget, omnibus budget?
Well, I can start with that one, serving on appropriations. As Senator Pettey mentioned, the sales tax on food is one that the governor has espoused and many in the legislature are supportive of, but we miss out on a tremendous opportunity to provide funding to our local community in various ways. But first and foremost, we are still recovering from the misguided tax plans of the Brownback administration. We still have outstanding debt that the governor has attempted to put forward in her budgeting process. What I really find ironic is that when we gave all the tax breaks we did, and now we're flush with cash, how all of a sudden everybody on the other side of the aisle wants to spend every bit of this money. And it's like, well, the Democrats are this party of tax and spend, but that's not true. We're the party of fiscal responsibility when you go back and listen to the debates and the discussion in reference to how these dollars are to be spent. But as the big challenge for us this year is the Apex bill that was passed both in the House and the Senate in reference to the large business that is in the running to come to Kansas. And should that happen, there's a tremendous amount of incentives put on the table, close to $1 billion worth of incentives. We have some work to do in reference to paying down capers. I believe that's part of the issue that we have, getting a better return on our investments. One of the things that that was discussed in appropriations was not to pay down the debt because the bonds are so low on those finances, and it's just go ahead and spend the money somewhere else. There's two realms of thinking here that is occurring in the budget process in the House. There are those that want to spend down the money, and then there's those that want to save it for the next election cycle. Then they can come in and shore up the programs and the issues that are pertinent to would be pertinent to the new administration. I'm one that believes that we pay down debt, be fiscally responsible, fund those programs and services that have been advanced by the governor, and then during omnibus talk about those other things like continued employee pay and continued contributions to CAPER, and quite possibly the expansion of Medicaid.
I would agree with everything that's Representative Burroughs said. You know, he's on appropriations, I'm on Ways and Means, and this next week there'll be work to bring those two budgets together. It has been an opportunity to be able to actually address some areas that we haven't been covering in the past, like when it comes to our developing needs area. So we have put more money there, but unfortunately we have overlooked, we have put aside, as he mentioned and I mentioned earlier, about access sales food tax. And sadly, I'm worried that we won't be doing anything towards that. I agree, we have paid off with the strong revenues that we have in these budgets on both sides. We have paid off debt, but and I am a CAPERS retiree, so I want to have a strong CAPERS system, which we do, but and we've had great investments coming back on our a great return on our investments. But I think we've overstepped it when we've gone past doing our responsibilities, and now we've put in $1 billion more, and that money could be used to access sales food tax. There is one issue that's passed on the House, on the Senate side, and we'll see if it stays alive, because there's a lot of interest in property taxes, and that's called the Golden Years Homestead property tax. A colleague of mine, Senator Holland, has worked on this for several years, and I've been a supporter of it. It would allow anyone who's 65 years of age or older and who have $75,000 income or below for their sales tax to be, for their property tax to be frozen at this year's rate. So that would provide relief for senior citizens, but at the same time, it wouldn't it would just keep them at this rate. So I think that's a good initiative. And of course, it does cost money, because it does take away revenues that are coming into our local governments as well as to the state. But I think it is an issue that's valid for us to continue to look at. So next week's going to be negotiations between both the House and the Senate on Ways and Means and Appropriations, and there's a lot of good things in that budget, but we really have overstepped, so that we will have a low ending balance that in a couple of years we're saying, hey, we don't have money. So that's not a good place to be.
Yep, I'll go next. Yeah, so the question's basically what's in the budget that I would like to see different at Omnibus, which Omnibus, for those who don't know, is kind of the end budget that we end up with when we leave session here in May. You know, we do have, through, as Representative Burroughs said, through good fiscally responsible policies, the governor's been, you know, you might criticize her on any number of things and praise her for many things. I will praise her on her ability to look at the budget and come up with really sound budgets. She is really, really good at that, and her staff has been fantastic and realistic. But that said, you know, we have $3 billion, and that could be one-time money that we have a little bit of an excess this year, and it could be from the federal stimulus. There's some of that will go away, and we're not sure exactly how much of that is going to go away. And so the idea of paying down these debts that we had incurred over the Brownback years has been great. We personally, I have a lot of constituents that work in the corrections field. I wish we would actually put more money in to our correction workers and some of our 24/7 folks. We did do some improvements there, but we continue to have workforce shortages there. I really would like to see us do a COLA, a cost of living allowance for our retirees and capers. We've been supportive of that. I have for the last 4 or 5 years, but there's been a lot of resistance to that. I echo the idea that we are losing money every year because we're not expanding Medicaid, and there's money to do that this year. And due to politics, we're not actually going to invest in this program that would help with the health care of our working families out there, but also would help provide that for workforce development purposes when we're in a workforce shortage time. And even though we're fully funding according to the different lawsuits that we resolved over the last few years, education, we still have a deficit in special education. We still could be putting more money into that. We are lower than we're federally supposed to be at, something like 72%. I forget the exact number. Or we're supposed to be up at 92%. And lastly, we especially in the Senate, our tax approach, we're looking at a budget and we're looking at taxes. It's a great year where we could be really looking fundamentally at what do we want to do to ease the burden of taxes on our population, or to spread it out, to take away the food sales tax for those that are struggling with food insecurity. Yet what we're doing is focusing on pet projects for individuals, looking at special places. We're looking at fencing and coupons, and I don't know. It's really sad that we're not taking a really good look across the board and doing something significant. Instead, we're kind of just playing politics when it comes to the tax restructuring and not putting that food sales tax reduction in place. So those are my words. my thoughts on it.
Thank you all. Okay, our next question, the topic is under safe and welcoming. The question is, the Attorney General has been able to have HB 2717 represented, which would prohibit the Wyandotte County and Roland Park safe and welcoming resolutions that support worked for diligently for years to have implemented. What are the likelihood of it passing? Senator Pittman, would you like, or?
I am not sure of the likelihood of it passing. I think that if it continues to move along, it will get at least the minimum majority in the House and the Senate. I am not sure where the governor stand on whether she would veto that action or not. After, when something gets passed out, as with a simple majority on both sides, it could be vetoed by the governor, and at that point it would require a supermajority, which is 84 votes, I believe, in the House and 27 votes in the Senate. And I am not sure. I honestly have no idea what the likelihood of either of those situations. Although I do think it would pass out of both the House and Senate at this point in time if leadership continues to push that.
I could share this with you. Passed out of the House with an overwhelming majority. I don't believe it'll be. If the governor was to veto it, I don't believe there's a support there to override the veto. And that's the good thing about it. This was an attack on home rule, is what this was. And the fact that Roland Park has a program very similar to Wyandotte County, but yet the years that they've had it, they chose not to introduce the bill that they've introduced against Wyandotte County. And I brought that up on the House floor. What's the difference between what Roland Park put forward and has been utilizing different than the one in Wyandotte County? So I'm still waiting on that answer. It'd be interesting to see, but I anticipate the two senators know their chamber better than I, but the issue in and of itself, I anticipate it passing in the Senate, but will it pass by a large majority or be a simple majority? And that'll give the guidance to the governor as to what action she'll take.
I'll just echo what my colleagues have said. I did support, I wrote a letter of support for the initiative to pass at the local level. And yes, I do think it's just an attack on our community, because we do have a very diverse community, and we're, at the local level, we're addressing the needs that our diverse community needs. So it's unfortunate. Again, it's just another attack on local government, on those decisions being made closest to where they should be made. And that's, in this case, at the local level through our local government. It mirrors everything we're doing with schools, because the same thing there, we're taking away the power of our school boards as well.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is on voting restrictions. This session, several bills have been introduced that restrict access to voting in different ways or make it easier to remove registered voters from the rolls. What effects would these measures have on voters in Wyandotte County, and what can be done to ensure that all registered voters are able to vote?
Well, the first thing they're trying to do is take away the number of drop boxes. They don't believe the drop boxes are a secure way in which to have votes counted or delivered. In every year, there seems to be more of an intent to disenfranchise the voter. And what's unfortunate about that is the policies they put forward are safeguard policies that are in place to ensure the integrity of elections. Our Secretary of State, Scott Schwab, has stated over and over since the presidential election, the Kansas election was some of the most secure elections in the country. But yet we still have our colleagues in both chambers that believe that there was malfeasance and skullduggery, whatever they want to call it, in reference to the election process. We have illegal voting going on. We have ballot stuffing. We have numerous actions taken to undermine the integrity of our election process, and that is just not the case.
We almost spent, well, this past week we had 40 bills that we voted on the Senate floor, a little 40 plus bills in a 2-day period of time. And I think 4 of those bills were, or 5, dealt with election, they might call it security, but it's election overreach. And as Representative Burroughs mentioned on the drop boxes, which have been a great tool in all our communities across the state of Kansas, but an amendment was offered on the Senate side that now would mean that we could only have drop boxes inside of a public building, or if it was outside, it would have, this almost makes me laugh, but it would have to have 2 people standing by it at all times, one a Democrat and one a Republican. So I don't think it takes very long for anybody to figure out there'll be, that acts, that's kind of like axe the drop boxes instead of axe the food sales tax. Every initiative is just really based on nothing, and it's certainly not anything to increase access for voters to vote. But I do think, there are a lot of Kansans that still have bought into this about some sort of voter fraud, and so in some ways the message can reiterate, because I even had one of the people that works on our Senate floor, not a elected official, but saying, well, I think everybody should have to vote by election day. And it's like, well, this isn't saying they're not going to vote by election days. We do currently, if you're voting by mail and your ballot's postmarked on election day, it still counts. But if it's received by that following Friday, and the legislation, one of the pieces of legislation now takes that away. So sometimes there's a misunderstanding about what's occurring, and that issue itself has increased the number of voters that were able to vote in the last election by 32,000. You'd think we would be applauding that as a great tool to get people to vote and to get their vote counted, but instead we're saying somehow it's spooky and nefarious, and it's causing problems. So I'd like to say some of the things are comical, but in fact it's sad what we're doing with these election bills, and it's all in reaction to very, very bad kind of thinking, and all tied to the pandemic and to our past president's issues of saying that our elections were fraud, and that's not true.
Well, yeah, I'll just echo that. I mean, the League of Women Voters, one of its important initiatives that I feel that they really, besides all the great things of getting people involved in the process, is they push to just get more people engaged with voting. And these bills are in direct opposition to that. When when you ask for evidence, there's none given. When you look at who brings the bills forward, it's some firm from out in Florida, one person proponent, not even from Kansas, a lot of these bills. And it plays into this narrative of fraud. And it's unfortunate. What it does is it makes it harder for these types of bills, makes it harder for those who are less frequently engaged in the process. When we automatically take people off of the voter rolls if they haven't voted in the last 4 years, some people are presidential year voters and they might not want to vote on a given 4-year cycle, and it starts triggering this proactively to get people off the voting rolls, and it doesn't really help anything. I mean, there's no fraud there. It's just removing people from the rolls so that when they actually go and expect to be on the voter rolls and they go back in 4 years and they find themselves not there, what happened? Why am I not here? It makes it harder for those who are working families to vote. Some folks who might not be able to get off during election day. Some people who work 2 jobs, kids, all these things make it harder for people to get there on that one day. And all the steps we've put in place to help with voting are under attack, it seems like. So I continue to work against those kind of narratives. We do want secure elections, but the proposition that these bills will help somehow create secure elections is not necessarily true. We know we've got good security, and it's been shown.
Thank you all. Our next question is under schools, and the question is, currently each school district has the choice to accept or not accept out of district students. What are your thoughts on forcing all school districts to accept out of district students?
I'll try to say this in a nice way. This is Senate Bill 455. It's terrible. It does nothing for our school districts. It does really nothing for families. It does set up a very, well, the original bill was even more complex than the current bill. And there is, unfortunately, I do think that this is going to become law in some way, because there is a similar bill on the House side that's tied to funding. And, but basically what it does is it sets in place, school districts already are doing this. The Bonner Springs School District, the Kansas School District, the Turner School District, the Piper School District, their school boards making the decisions about their transfer policies, and those are made at the local level, and they're based on local populations and what local school boards see as in the best interest. So you hear the concern of a school district like Piper, a growing school district, saying, hey, we just passed a bond, and our families are paying for that and they support that. And so we want to make sure that we have capacity for our families. And so they're going to make decisions based on transfers on that whole issue. Kansas City, Kansas would be doing the same sort of thing, maybe not having the same sort of growth, or Turner or Bonner, but also deciding by what they have capacity for. So this puts in a policy in place. School districts have to set it up. They have to have it there on their websites. They have to put out a process for application in both early summer and mid-year in November. And my biggest fear is that once this legislation passes, that then it'll be criticized that districts are not doing what the legislature wanted them to do, because they are basing it on their capacity. And capacity, as one superintendent, the superintendent of Shawnee Mission said, no district should be basing their capacity on 100%, because then you're saying you would never have growth within your district. And whether you have children in school or not right now, that kids do come in, they do go out, but buildings want to be able to face that need. So it's being driven at the state level. There's no school district says they want this. No one in the educational community has come forward for this. So it's a solution. It's a solution looking for a problem.
Yeah, I'll weigh in. In the Leavenworth Lansing area, the school districts already do this. They let students move back and forth. They basically balance out the load between the schools, and it offers some choice between students. They're close enough where it doesn't get too bad, but that's because the local school boards and the local administration have decided how that's going to work. And I think that's fine. It works fine for them. But for some districts, if we really allow it to open up and we allow the funding, not, whether it's fun, we don't know, the next step after this is this the funding going to follow the student, or is it not following the student? And it opens up a lot of different problems for districts where if I have a lot of students moving away from or leaving that district, does the funding then follow the district, and that district basically collapses in on itself? It's hard to tell what the future of this holds if we force it. There's an issue about transportation for kids that are moving between districts. It's bad for budgeting. And as Senator Pettey had mentioned, it doesn't take into account that the local community is putting up the bond issues for their local districts, and that wouldn't be accounted for in this. So it poses a lot of challenges, and I was not supportive of it when it was on the Senate floor.
I would agree with my colleagues. It just asserts local control, and what you will see is opportunity for school districts to cherry pick should they choose to do so. And that is unfortunate for the student. But what hasn't been discussed here is the transportation modes that would be utilized for the transfer of students. If a student hypothetically wants to leave one of our school districts and go to school in southern Johnson County or out west, who's going to provide the transportation for that? It was even mentioned in House discussion, and I believe it's substitute for House Bill 2615 that, well, are we going to be utilizing Uber to move some of our students? And I mean, just some of the ridiculous proposals that come forward, but again, it never ceases to amaze me, the attack on public education that we have, and the distrust of our local school boards, our local superintendents, and the communities that support public education as a whole. So I'm opposed to this. It did pass the House 63 to 59. That's a very minimum requirement. I would believe that if the governor was to veto this, that it would be sustained. So while I worry about it, it just disappoints me to see that we're once again wasting our time on an attack of public education.
One last thing I'll mention is that it seems as though it could be good for those who can afford it. If I can afford to drop my kid off and a school district next to mine or one beyond that, like Southern Johnson County, I have the time, I have the income, I have enough, whatever, and I could do it, that's great. But for those kids who aren't as fortunate, maybe single parent, maybe somebody working, 2 jobs, maybe each parent works, who knows the situation. But those are the kids that would not be able to take advantage of this type of movement between districts, and that'd be unfortunate. It's unfortunate for those who probably need that help the most.
Okay. Senator Petty, you're muted. Somehow.
I'm sorry, I hit
There you
hit it 3 times. Just one other piece is that this just goes along with other education bills, whether it's the Parental Bill of Rights, about these are chipping away, and it's a constant move towards vouchers. And this is one piece of it.
Okay, so the time is getting close to finishing here. So this will be the last question. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna state the topics since we have people here in the room. I'm just gonna name the topics real quick and you decide if you think that's the best question area topic. Property taxes, mental health, schools, public health, environmental local control, redistricting, schools, redistricting Board of Education, sales tax, and budget surplus and gun control. So does anybody have any thoughts on that in the room?
Well, we touched on a lot of those.
Increase in property taxes? Okay, so our last question. Let me see where. Okay, this question is, I've heard that the legislature is considering moving the city's portion of the county sales tax to the county. This would be a significant decrease in revenue that cities use for critical city services. What is your position on taking this revenue source away from cities?
I don't believe I've heard that discussion. I know we've talked about eliminating the sales tax on food, but that would keep the cities whole. They would be allowed to keep whatever sales tax revenue they want. But it's not my understanding that there will be any sales tax taken away from cities or counties, at least not in the discussions that I've been privy to.
I would agree. I'm not sure. I mean, there's been more conversations around property taxes than sales taxes or remove. Or I really don't even know that issue at all. Jeff?
Well, I was going to say, there was a discussion. There's a thing called the ad valorem tax, as we all know, in the legislature, which was a negotiated sales tax piece for the cities and counties with the state that was taken away 20 years ago, and it hasn't really returned. That money was in the governor's budget to return that and have that money going straight back to the cities and counties where it came from instead of being taken by the state. And that would allow for some, better budgeting by the cities and counties. I don't know if that's what the question asker was asking about, but there's the other aspect of property taxes where we have constitutional language and statutes that specify how that process happens. And I know that in my district and everybody's districts here, our evaluations are going higher now, and that's causing a lot of strain on folks. And I know that we've considered a couple of different bills on how to maybe look at property tax evaluations and maybe keeping a throttle on them somehow, but none of those have been really well looked at to say, okay, is this practical? Is it something that we can do? We've had a couple of property tax bills that when we have disasters and things like that, what can we do to help ease that burden? But I wouldn't say we have had a consistent or well thought out discussion from our tax committee on how do we approach this over a 20-year time period, working with counties and cities to come up with anything better in terms of our property tax methodology. That's my current opinion on that. I don't know if you guys have anything else you want to talk about with that.
Well, we did pass, isn't it Senate Bill 40 last year that really changes the process, and Representative Burroughs can speak to this even better, but at the local level about the process that our local governments have to do when they see increase in if their revenues are going up from property taxes. I think it's important to remember that how property taxes are, how your valuations are determined is driven by state law. And so our appraiser's office bases their decisions on what we have put in place for them to do that. So I would prefer that we let this new law go into effect before we start tampering already with it just being there for 1 year. And the other part of that is that, I mean, my valuations, I'm sure like both of yours and ladies, yours as well, went up, and that's driven by, that's driven by demand and selling values. So we can't always control that part of it, even though we don't like it until we're selling our houses.
Right.
Tom?
Well, let me just say on that Senate Bill 40, I feel as though it wasn't a very effective law myself.
We've only had it for 1 year.
Yeah, but it's about transparency. And so when the valuations go up, they have to have a hearing. It puts a lot of burden on local governments, local entities, but it doesn't actually enforce much, in my opinion. And so it's more about penalizing local governments when they have an evaluation that goes higher if they choose not to reduce the mill levy. And I mean, it's a mechanism and it's a way for the public to weigh in, but I just don't feel like it's a great way to, it just doesn't approach the whole issue very well, in my opinion. But that's just my opinion on it. So,
Representative Burroughs, I don't know if you know you were muted.
I am. Thank you. I believe what my colleagues are referring to is the revenue neutral rate that is in play today. And as it's been stated, property values all across the state of Kansas have gone up. And we are just now catching up with the rest of the country. Unfortunately, it's your local level decisions and the budgets they put together that determine your mill levy. And in the state, mill levy hasn't changed. What has changed is all the taxing entities within your community. And in our community, we have the community college, every school district, the public library system. We have the SMID downtown. We have the drainage districts. All of those have taxing authority. So when you collectively put that together, that drives a higher mill. The revenue neutral rate is when the assessment goes up, when the assessments go up, your a dollar amount goes up that you bring in revenues. You need to lower your mill to get to the same amount of revenue, and that's what they call the revenue neutral, or you have to bring it to the public for a discussion and possibly passage. And that comes with a cost, as was stated by Senator Pittman. But rest assured, I know that we are not the only community struggling with that. I know our colleagues to the south are dealing with the same issue of increased property values. And some of them can be quite onerous, especially if your home hasn't been reassessed in 2 to 3 years. But the demand is out there. And our homes are our number one financial asset in most cases. And it's very important that we do what we can as elected leaders. I think the 65 and older that was discussed earlier, freezing the sales tax or freezing the property tax. We know it's the most onerous tax out there, but particularly for seniors, I believe that we will have more discussion in reference to how we control the increase in property tax by the end of the session.
Okay. Well, thank you all. And that was the last question. We did have about 6 other questions that we didn't get to. I'm sure if the League of Women Voters wants to save that and somebody wants that information, we can get it to you as well. So thank you. And at this time, I will turn it over to Jack for closing remarks. Thank you. Thank you.
So thank you, Teresa, for moderating. Thank you to the legislators for making time to share your perspectives with us. And thank you all for joining us today and engaging in conversation. If you were unable to get your questions answered, we are providing a link in the chat with the legislators' contact information. The League and the library will be posting a recording of this coffee on Facebook and YouTube. Please share them with your network of voters. Thank you again, everyone.
Thank you.
Jack,
Thanks, Jack.
I'd like to say thank you to you and to those that joined us in the audience and online today. It's always a privilege to serve the good people of Wyandotte County, Kansas City, Kansas, Bonner Springs, Edwardsville. And thank you to my colleagues for joining us this morning also. I do hope it was informative morning. Thank you to the League of Women Voters for allowing us to do so.
I'll echo Representative Burroughs. It was an honor and a pleasure to be here. And I just want to thank all those hardworking teachers who are providing a learning environment for our children so that they can have the educational skills to be successful, and to our hardworking healthcare workers at every level. And that everyone who is making wise decisions every day to stay healthy and to work for our community in a positive way. We've got a great governor. Has put out a strong budget, and I hope that we are successful in promoting some of these issues, like, or making some of these things like access sales food tax and the golden years issue for our seniors come to fruition at the end of this session. So thank you again.
Yep, I'll reiterate both Representative Burroughs and Senator Pettey's comments. Obviously, we're here to serve. It's an honor serving you. Reach out at votepittman.com is my website, and I've got a newsletter that comes out each week during the session. Thanks again for the opportunity to be here.